Okay, we're going to discuss dark money in politics for our special tonight. And I'm actually going to bring on Tyler O'Neill here in just a couple minutes because he wrote a great book on this and he knows a lot about dark money in politics and how it works. So I'm not going to break down the nitty gritty for you right off the bat here, but I want you to understand something that we have all come to realize over time. Over a long enough period of time, you will realize this. You turn on the television set one day and George Floyd's dead, right? You social media, you look at George Floyd, he's dying, he's crying, oh my gosh, that's terrible. But then you turn on the television and there are just all these protests and riots all over the country. Oh my gosh, they're tearing down statues and they're looting Foot Locker. And you think to yourself, wow, a lot of people are really angry. Whether you agree, disagree, doesn't matter. You think to yourself, man, masses and masses of people are angry. Look at all the people in the streets. It's human nature. But what we have to understand and accept is that almost all of the communist activism you see in the country, when the street animals are gluing themselves to the roads and putting on their new Nikes, it's paid for and organized. Paid for and organized. Professional riots, that's what communists do, and they've always done this. They will pay a few rabble-rousers to get the college kids whipped up into a frenzy. They'll ship pallets of bricks into your city and hand them out to the various professional communist street agitators who will then send things out on social media and their friends, and soon it's a text thread. Soon it becomes the cool thing to do. And you look at a protest with 1,000 people in the streets losing their minds and say to yourself, wow, so many people are angry, when the real truth is it's 5 to 10 professionals with a few social media accounts and some of your money in their pocket paying for all of this. Professional political activism has been going on in this country for decades, absolutely decades. It's not just George Soros. That's the name we all know. The truth is, you know who the biggest funder of communist street activism is in this country? You. That's the truth. The American taxpayer funds virtually everything you see. Now, this dark money network sounds shadowy and scary, and it is, but what are the details of it? What are the kind of things they do? Tyler O'Neill wrote an amazing book on this called Woketopus, and we'll dig into a lot of this with Tyler next. And I'm going to warn you right now, before we go to Tyler, it can be hard to hear. It can be hard to take in when you think about all the taxes you've paid, and then you find out those taxes were used against you. You funded the revolution against you. That's where we are as a country right now. Tyler O'Neill will break a lot of it down now. Next.
Who's really in control in Washington? How can the President of the United States, someone who wields immense power, be pressured to step aside? This summer, Americans across the country learned that the real power in Washington does not reside in the Oval Office. That nice Constitution you learned about in school, with its nifty checks and balances, that one that tells you how the government works, that's a lie. Instead, a far-left network of donors props up a system of woke nonprofits that infiltrate and advise the federal government, sometimes in direct opposition to the president. I call this governing behemoth the Woketopus.
I can't wait for this conversation. Joining me now, Tyler O'Neill, author of The Woketopus, which I'm sure if you haven't bought it already, you will be buying it at some point in time during this. He's also the managing editor of the Daily Signal, I should point out. Okay, Tyler, a lot of people wake up now and they look at the news and they see this NGO did what and that NGO did what, and they're just stunned. You should see my emails. People were just stunned. I'm so mad. I'm so angry. I shouldn't even have to pay taxes. But there's one person who most definitely was not stunned, and that would be you. How in the world did we get to this place where we're ruled by these monsters?
Yeah, well, that is an excellent question. I mean, I think the main reason why I got into this in the first place was because I saw one of these really radical woke NGOs, the Southern Poverty Law Center, demonize conservatives and Christians put them on a hate map with chapters of the Klan, and then actually have humongous impact in the Biden administration. I mean, we had the Department of Justice going to the SPLC for advice on fighting domestic terrorism. We had the Department of Education going to SPLC for advice when SPLC was putting Moms for Liberty on the hate map with Ku Klux Klan chapters. We had President Biden nominate a top SPLC attorney to a federal judgeship. And of course, we had that notorious anti-Catholic memo from the FBI that used as its major source the Southern Poverty Law Center. So the Southern Poverty Law Center is propped up by a bunch of left-wing dark money groups. And these groups also propped up most of the organizations that I looked at for the book, organizations that have been sending staff and ideas into the Biden White House. And of course, many of us wondered who was really calling the shots when President Biden called his lids so early in the day. You know, we all saw the legacy media couldn't even hide it anymore during that debate, how far gone the former president was. And, you know, he was largely a figurehead. It's funny to hear Democrats refer to President Trump as a king, because Biden was the guy who acted like a medieval king, who would stand back and not really do all that much while his massive court carried out all of his agenda items. And we're listening to the big aristocracy, the left's dark money network from outside. So my book exposes the woke activist groups that seeded ideas and staff into the administration, propped up by this vast dark money enterprise. And by the way, some of these dark money groups are tied in to USAID in particular, and at least one of them, the Tides Foundation, has received more than $20 million from USAID.
Oh, jeez. Tyler, I want you to talk about the employment portion of this, because the personnel portion of it has always fascinated me, how these people just kind of bounce back and forth. You get a Democrat in the White House, then you leave your dirtball commie NGO and you go work in the White House. The second he loses, you have a good cushy job waiting for you at a new NGO where you make $500,000 a year. Go ahead, talk about it.
Yeah. So that's exactly what happened. And we saw this reach a fever pitch in the Biden administration. You had people like Tracy Stone Manning, who wrote a letter on behalf of tree-spiking eco-terrorists, decades ago. That came up in her confirmation hearing. She was at a left-wing, radical green left-wing NGO that wanted to crack down on oil and gas. Biden nominated her to head the Department of the Bureau of Land Management in the Department of the Interior. So this radical activist, she goes and heads up this agency. Then as soon as Trump wins, what does she do? She gets the heck out of Dodge and goes and becomes the president of the Wilderness Society, where she is now. And you saw this green revolving door. It's one of my chapters in the book. I talk about the green revolving door and influence network, where you had these green activists at a woke NGO many of these NGOs, by the way, they're going on and on about environmental racism. They take climate alarmism and critical race theory and put them together into this really noxious ideology that says, not only do we have to crack down on the most reliable, cheapest form of energy that we have, carbon emissions, besides nuclear, it is the most reliable and cheapest form of energy. And by the way, very safe these days, the way we burn them here in the United States. But not only do we have to crack down on that, but we also have to do so in a way that prioritizes people based on their skin color, based on their gender identity, based on all these, woke identifiers. You go down the list, and it's this intersectional critical race theory lens that says, you get an organization that was started to care for the environment, I think of the Sierra Club, for instance. I grew up in Colorado. I love the natural environment. I want to see these places protected as much as possible, as much as anybody else does. And by the way, carbon emissions and driving your gas guzzler is the number one way we as human beings can appreciate the different types of the natural environment. So, this idea that driving your car and protecting the earth are fundamentally in conflict is entirely wrongheaded. But you have these woke activist groups that started for noble purposes, like protecting the environment. Now they're focused on environmental justice, bringing DEI and climate alarmism, and sometimes also gender ideology, and pushing them all together into this woke synthesis that says, we know better, and the bureaucrats know better, and the American people, who cares what you think? And so these people, these woke NGOs, they're a very natural fit for the bureaucracy, because this ideology that the left's elites is pushing on the American people aligns very well with the university set, with these woke NGOs, and with a lot of the corrupt bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. And this bureaucracy is, it is far beyond, I say in the trailer, that the government that we learned about in school is a lie, because a lot of the rules that you and I have to live by are issued through the bureaucracy. If you look at the amount of rules, amount of laws that Congress passes every year, and then the amount of regulations that the administrative state passes, there is no comparison. These things are entirely separate. And so what we have to live with as Americans every day is largely these rules from the unelected bureaucrats. And so right now, Elon Musk is going from, and actually really DOGE is going from agency to agency to agency, exposing the waste, fraud, and abuse. And the left can't take it, because every time they fearmonger about the threats to our democracy, they really mean threats to their bureaucracy.
I want you to focus on something that I've been fascinated by, Tyler, and that's something you just brought up, is the university connection here, because it is just one big happy group of dirty commies that work together. Because then you look at all these groups and you're overwhelmed. You read your book, you're overwhelmed by the number of groups and then the number of scumbags we have in this country, and you wonder, where do these people come from? They all come from college.
Yeah, well, it has been very interesting if you look at American history. In the 60s, you had this movement with these radical leftist people. They called themselves the Weather Underground. And they did these terrorist attacks in the United States. These people, they didn't just disappear. A lot of them faced charges, but then they ended up getting off. And they ended up finding homes in the universities and creating this, we have this Marxist march through the institutions, where the universities are captured, where Hollywood gets captured, where all these places get captured by the Marxist ideology and these people who want to fundamentally transform America. And so that's how you get, the great awakening in 2020, where you had people across the educational sphere. And of course, this was happening in K-12 schools in particular, driving parents crazy, seeing the teachers teach that America is a fundamentally racist system, that we have to overhaul things, all because of George Floyd. I'm telling you, George Floyd was a tragic incident, but that's not representative. You had all this legacy media coverage of every single possible situation where police were involved in the death of a Black person. And this is not representative of the actual statistics of who's getting killed. More white people get killed by police, I believe, is the statistic that you see. And that doesn't matter, because the main thing here is that our criminal justice system has to be colorblind, right? And so if you commit a crime, regardless of your skin color, you should face the law. Unfortunately, we have this ideological system that says if you are of a certain race, if you are of a certain gender, you need to be treated differently because you're oppressed, because America's system is fundamentally oppressive. And therefore, you get people like George Soros getting back to the dark money angle here. George Soros has funded the vast soft on crime rogue prosecutor movement. And this has led to, in the name of criminal justice reform, some policies in criminal justice reform are good. But if you look at the sort of things that George Soros has been funding, these prosecutors who come out and say they will not prosecute certain types of crime, that enables, you're creating an incentive for people to engage in criminal activity. And so you see a crime wave spark across the United States. And all of this is happening while George Soros is funding the vast left-wing influence campaign that I talk about in the book. Woke NGO after woke NGO after woke NGO. And by the way, President Biden gave him the Presidential Medal of Freedom earlier this year, right on Biden's way out the door. I mean, it was as if Biden wanted to destroy his own party by revealing exactly where the shots were being called, by saying this man, George Soros, who funded this crime wave. The Democrats like to try to flip the narrative and say, oh, Republicans want to defund the police. Well, if you wanted concrete evidence that it's the left that's pushing the war on cops, it was George Soros, and Biden decided to give him the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which, by the way, if I had known that was like, I had no idea that Biden was going to do that. That one moment reaffirmed everything I write about in the book, because the book is all about how this dark money network, one of the major figures of which is George Soros, of course, is funding these woke NGOs that impacted the Biden administration. And Biden just comes along and says, oh yeah, your basic thesis for your book, I'm going to do the one thing that proves you right in spades.
Yeah, I hope you sent him a thank you letter for that little move. Speaking of Joe Biden, did these dark money groups have some kind of a hand in Joe Biden getting shoved out the back door?
That is an excellent question. I don't have proof of it. But what I do have, and what is very interesting, George Soros isn't the guy running Open Society Foundations anymore. It's his son, Alex Soros. Alex Soros, from the beginning, said he was going to be more political than his dad. What happened when Biden dropped out of the race? I mean, you should look at the timelines for this, because they're really revealing. Right before Biden drops out of the race, you get this leak from Obama and Pelosi, from their people, that they were telling Biden he had to drop out. And this was while Biden was insisting, until he was blue in the face, that he's going to stay in the race. I'm fine. Don't question. I'm in it to win it. Then immediately, as soon as Biden announces, you suddenly get this message from Alex Soros, who goes on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter, and posts like, I'm all for Kamala Harris, that we're going to make America. He doesn't say we're going to make America great again, but we're going to have Kamala in office and change the way things are, and full steam ahead with her. And it really looks as though Alex Soros was involved. I don't know if he was calling the shots, or if he just knew what was happening, but he was ready to hop on the Kamala train as soon as that announcement dropped.
How about that? What a tangled web. Gosh, Hollywood can't do freaking soap operas like this. Okay, let's talk quickly before we get to the border stuff. In all your digging with all these NGOs, did you ever see any alignment with the Central Intelligence Agency?
No. So I've been very focused for this book on the specific impacts that we can trace with different parts of the administrative state. And I looked at the weaponization of law enforcement, particularly the FBI and the DOJ, but the CIA, and this is one of the aspects of the Woketopus that I'd love to get into, maybe in another book and more of my research going forward, especially as the Trump administration releases more documents. I like to say, this book is just the opening chapter. I'm starting to peel back the onion. I don't have all of the answers, but I think this research provides an important roadmap for more of those answers coming forward. So the CIA is not something I was very focused on in this book.
Talk about the border invasion. Who funded that? Where'd that come from?
Yes. So the left's dark money network propped up these woke NGOs that encouraged the Biden administration from before day one. I mean, this is the transition. As soon as it was declared that Biden won that election, which, there are many questions about that election, but as soon as it was declared that Biden won that election, they started pressuring the new Biden team to open the border. And a few of the ways they did this, the Biden transition team named for DHS people from woke NGOs that had called on the administration to change the way that DHS operates. The Department of Homeland Security, which is tasked, among other things, with keeping the border safe and secure and enforcing immigration law. DHS, these NGOs wanted to change DHS and its core mission. And, the Center for American Progress is the one I always return to, because there's like one sentence where they sum up so perfectly their ideological call, and it's essentially what the Biden administration did. They said that DHS should treat immigration as an asset to be managed rather than a crime to be enforced against. And I think that one message, and this is coming from the Center for American Progress, which fed more than 60 staff into the Biden administration. Particularly, they led to one of the guys who wrote that memo ended up being a key lawyer in DHS. And of course, the American Civil Liberties Union, which is now suing Trump to block all his border policies to bring sanity to the border, the ACLU had one of the main leaders in the transition team for DHS. So the ties here are very obvious. But an ACLU essentially wanted to do the same thing. What they wanted to see from DHS is what they saw, which is taking an agency that was focused on law enforcement and keeping the border safe and secure, and switching that, turning its focus to enabling as many illegal aliens to come to the United States as possible. And that's what we saw from program after program after program. We saw the CHNV program, which literally flew illegal aliens from Cuba, Nicaragua, Haiti, Venezuela into the United States. And I mean, these people, when I call them illegal aliens, it's important to note, even though the Biden administration said, we want you in this country, that's not enough to make an alien legal. They have to come through pathways established by Congress, lawful pathways that make them legal immigrants. And only Congress has the authority to change the law to enable more people to come here legally. So these illegal aliens, every illegal alien that Biden intentionally imported into this country is still here illegally. And I mean, I think Trump is working overtime to deport as many of them, especially the criminals, especially those who are violent. I mean, but let's be clear. Every single person who violates the law to come to this country is a criminal in to one degree or another. And I think it's important to say, the left always says, look, they say immigrants or undocumented immigrants commit fewer crimes on average than native-born Americans. And it's like, well, even if that's true, and the statistics on that are not very reliable, even if that's true, 100% of the crime that is committed by illegal aliens can be prevented by deporting them or by enforcing our immigration laws. And that's the common sense policy that the American people want to see out of Washington. And it's the exact opposite of what the Woketopus demanded.
Is that the only dark money you found in law enforcement, or is there more?
So the dark money that I focus on was propping up these NGOs that then staffed and advised the Biden administration. I don't have dark money evidences to specifically paying off people in law enforcement, but the law enforcement aspect of this, especially federal law enforcement, involves three different general angles. First off is the Southern Poverty Law Center, which I can't talk about enough. I wrote my first book about them. I think they are the tip of the spear when it comes to demonizing conservatives and Christians who dare to dissent from the left's woke narrative on issue after issue. So the SPLC puts immigration groups that want to enforce immigration law on the hate map with chapters of the Ku Klux Klan. It puts Alliance Defending Freedom and other organizations that protect religious freedom on the hate map with the Klan. It puts Moms for Liberty on there. If you look at it's almost become the case that any conservative organization that has any impact in the United States is on that hate map. It's not quite true, but it's almost there. And I actually had a story last year of all the groups that are offended that they weren't put on the hate map because that, they acted, and of course they don't really mean this, but they acted as though it was an insult that they weren't considered effective enough to demonize in this way. The thing is, it's very easy to mock the SPLC. They've had a lot of scandals in the past. They're right now dealing with accusations of union busting, but of course they had racial discrimination, sexual harassment, one thing after another. The SPLC has no credibility, but the Biden administration decided, oh, this is the organization we want advising us on domestic terrorism. And that's why you saw the FBI memo attacking radical traditional Catholics. We also, of course, saw the FBI going after concerned parents with the letter from that the White House actually worked a little bit on beforehand, the letter from Chip Slavin and the National School Boards Association, which I also talk about in the book. And then, of course, there was the attacks on the pro-life protesters. So under Biden, we had this historic leak of a Supreme Court ruling, the Supreme Court opinion striking down Roe v. Wade and Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Association. And this led to a rash of attacks on pro-life pregnancy centers, on Catholic churches across the United States. We're talking, upwards of, I think it's 80 attacks on pregnancy centers and other pro-life groups, and then hundreds of attacks on Catholic churches. The Biden DOJ essentially turns the other way, turns a blind eye. I think there are like a handful of cases they bring, but almost nothing. Meanwhile, they bring at least 50 cases against pro-lifers who are protesting outside abortion clinics, some of whom are only, standing there silently praying. One of them, Mark Hook, faced federal charges after local authorities decided not to prosecute him because they found that the case lacked any merit. He was defending his son who had been accosted by an abortion clinic employee. And then, of course, the FBI turns up at Mark Hook's house where all he wakes up all his kids, arrests him at gunpoint. And all of this is happening under a Biden DOJ that has essentially been weaponized against conservatives. And so I was able to trace that back. One of the main figures in that case was a woman by the name of Kristen Clark, who headed up the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. And she had lied. I mean, this is a story that my former colleague now, Mary Margaret Olahan, uncovered for the Daily Signal, that this Kristen Clark had intentionally hidden the fact that she had gotten arrested for a domestic violence incident with her then husband, where she sliced his finger to the bone in a particularly gruesome domestic violence thing. And she came from another one of these left-wing NGOs and got pulled into the Biden administration and essentially carried out this effective jihad against conservatives, against pro-lifers. And they said, these Biden officials, they actually said, we're focusing on enforcing the FACE Act. That's what they called it, because this is a response to the Supreme Court's overturning of Roe v. Wade. And this is, again, pushing this narrative that the Supreme Court was somehow siding with and giving pro-lifers an edge, almost as if the Supreme Court were saying from on high, look, we're going to defend the unborn and make abortion illegal. That's not what happened. As I'm sure your audience is well aware, the Supreme Court said, we are opening the laws. We're allowing states to make their own laws on this important issue. And this is something that the pro-life movement had been calling for decades, because the Supreme Court had weaponized the law in favor of abortion. And now we have an equal playing field, or at least something close to it, except on this issue, the left's dark money. There's this guy called Hans-Jörg Wyss, who's a Swiss who moved to the United States and wants to change the way our government works. He sent a lot of money to the 1630 Fund, which is one of these nonprofits that was founded by Arabella Advisors, which is a for-profit company. These nonprofits cloak where donors send their money. And the 1630 Fund was one of the big funders behind the abortion ballot initiative in Ohio. So we have this red state that passes a very pro-abortion ballot initiative. And one of the only reasons they were able to pass that was because they had dark money from Hans-Jörg Wyss through 1630 Fund. And now, thankfully, Ohio has banned foreign dark money in ballot initiatives. They're one of the few states to do so. But this threat of the left's dark money network, it's directly at the federal government level, which I expose in the book, but it's also at the state level. We have to keep our eyes open for this threat.
Tyler, how much of this dark money we've been talking about for a half hour here is foreign money? I find this to be so fascinating, not just the domestic stuff, but the stuff that comes from overseas. All these dirty commies what's their motivation? How much of that is out there?
Yeah, so we don't know. And then, of course, this is the thing about dark money. Dark money inherently it refers to organizations, like nonprofit organizations don't have to disclose their donors. And I think that's an important First Amendment right, that you can give money to an organization you believe in without having to disclose your name. I mean, this goes back, centuries, but we also had a very important case with the NAACP, where NAACP donors were targeted, and the Supreme Court ruled that the NAACP did not have to disclose its donors. Recently, Americans for Prosperity had a similar situation. So I support, let's be clear, I support allowing dark money to exist in the system. I think people like Sheldon Whitehouse, who act as though all dark money needs to be banned, they need to look at where the dark money is, because a lot of it is on the left. That said, you can follow a lot of the money in some of these cases when they're nonprofits registered with the IRS. They disclose which organizations they're supporting, which is how I'm able to talk about where the Tides Foundation, where these Arabella advisors, established nonprofits send their money. It's all public tax records that you can find where this stuff is. So there are important ways that our system allows the disclosure of some of this money. And it's important for us to follow where the money is as much as we can. The short answer to your question is we don't know how much foreign money there is in the system. We do know that there are foreign grants. There are people like Hans-Jörg Wyss who is funneling his money, and he is not American, so his money is technically, at least as far as we know, he has been repeatedly asked if he's going to get U.S. citizenship. As of now, it hasn't been clear that he has gotten U.S. citizenship, and I don't think he will. But foreign money is a problem, and we see, places like Qatar sending money to many U.S. universities. Some of the groups I talk about in the book are anti-Israel. And some of them also have ties to foreign governments, particularly Qatar, and of course we've seen China have its money that it's shoveling to U.S. institutions, particularly American universities have influence from China. Unfortunately, this is the kind of thing that I'd love to do more research on for the next book, because there is enough dark money here in the United States that's funding all these things that I don't need to speculate how much is coming from foreign countries. But I will note that the Southern Poverty Law Center, for instance, has thousands of dollars, or actually I think it's millions. I need to check to make sure what the latest numbers are, because they reported this on their tax documents, but they have a huge amount of money in Cayman Islands accounts. And this is a nonprofit organization. It's like you can't make this stuff up, but that's how these people are. And that's the organizations we're talking about. These left-wing NGOs, they think they are above us in every particular way. And that's part of this bureaucratic mindset of we know better than the American people. And this is what allows them to support, I think the last leg, I define woke as 4 different aspects: critical race theory, gender ideology, climate alarmism, and a preference for technocratic government. That last aspect, I think, is an important one, because we see over and over and over again the left favoring causes that are very top down, that are bureaucratic, that are saying, like, we want everyone to be unionized, for instance. I mean, Biden went up there and actually said he lied about the law, about US labor law, and said, look, the purpose of these laws is to make more people join unions, to prop up unions. And it's like, no, the purpose of the law is to have fair policies so that if workers want to join unions, and by the way, unions should be legal, except when they're in the federal government. That's a whole different can of worms. But unions should be legal, and Americans should be able to join them. Americans should also be able to opt out of joining them. And the big debate here is you have these union superstructures that are supporting all the woke causes and supporting Democrats most of the time. And many of the big money funders in my book are unions. You have the AFL-CIO, you have the AFSCME, you have NEA, the National Education Association, American Federation of Teachers. How many teachers in these unions know that a portion of their union dues is going to support far left activist causes in the name of charity, these causes that are influencing the federal government and pushing, as I describe in the book, open borders, crackdowns on oil and gas. It's crazy to think that, a public school teacher in Detroit could be part of a union that is taking her money and sending it to a left-wing NGO that wants to crack down on oil and gas. And so the very students that she teaches, their parents might be losing their jobs, and that teacher might have to pay more at the gas pump because of policies that she is unwittingly funding through her union dues.
Oh. What about the judges, Tyler? You ever find anything about the judges? Because every day now we wake up and we see the Trump administration wants to do this. Oh, judge blocks it. Wants to do this. Judge blocks it. Oftentimes it's the same stupid judge who'll just be blocking this and blocking that. Well, how are they getting there?
Yeah, so naturally you have the bias of the Biden administration that was promoting these people into these positions. I don't see, the difficulty is there are so many federal judges that it would be hard. Like, this is another book length topic, because it's very hard to pinpoint which judge exactly is going to rule that, for instance, President Trump doesn't have the authority as president to actually do what a president should be able to do. The most basic thing, if you are a president, you should be able to fire someone in the executive branch. The Constitution is 100% clear that the executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States, not in unelected bureaucrats, not in judges who can prevent the president from firing people, but in a president of the United States. And so ultimately, I think Trump is going to win on these cases. But so many of these judges think that they know better than the people and the people's elected president. And it's that same bureaucratic mindset that I discuss in the book that these judges have. So, one of the connections of the book is many of these unions, these federal employee unions that are filing the lawsuits that are seeking to block Trump's policies. They're part of these massive union superstructures that are sending this money and favoring these policies that protect unions and empower unions. So one of the things that I think is very important for weakening the deep state is reform to civil service protections, and especially reform to the way that federal public sector unions work. Even, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the guy who essentially created our administrative state after Woodrow Wilson created it, and then it got dismantled temporarily, and then FDR created it. FDR very clearly and unequivocally stated that public sector unions are a horrible thing for America. They would effectively pit the public servants against the people's elected representatives. And this would have negative ramifications. Unfortunately, JFK didn't listen to that, and JFK paved the way for public sector unions. So now when you see the American Federation for Government Employees, which is the largest public sector union in the federal government, filing lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit to stop Trump's reforms, getting these judges to block Trump's reforms, that is exactly part of the nefarious influence campaign that I describe in the book, because they align with these massive union superstructures.
God, what a freaking mess. The book is Woketopus. If you want to know more about who really runs this country than you've ever known in your life, go buy Tyler O'Neill's book, Woketopus. Tyler, that was awesome. Brother, come back anytime. Appreciate you very much. It's ugly, right? We're not quite done. We'll be back. Now, that was all the bad news. This vast dark money network. And again, like we talked about with Tyler, we don't even have the details. And because of the legal walls put up in front of us, we probably will never have the details. Who specifically funds this? How did the money move here? Well, like any criminal organization, like the mafia, there's a shell company with a shell company under it and a shell company under it. And they do that to keep the truth from you and I. But the truth from a 30,000-foot view is actually quite simple. The American taxpayer funds the federal government. The federal government is full of committed communists who will take as much of your money as humanly possible and send them into this dark money communist network to fund the communist revolution against your country. That's the situation we're in. That's the bad news. The good news is, currently, that system is under attack. Now, it's going to take a whole lot of DOGE to deconstruct a network that's spent decades building. But we are beginning to do the work, beginning to understand it now. So put a smile on your face. We will see victory in the end. All right, we'll do it again.